The Queen's last hope was a human groom. What happened next shocked the entire empire. The doors sealed behind me before I understood what was happening. I had walked into that chamber as nobody, a junior aide standing in for an ambassador who was too busy celebrating a peace treaty to attend a minor Jarnesi ceremony. I thought I would stand quietly at the back, nod at the right moments, and leave before dinner. Instead, 6 armored guards with clicking mandibles surrounded me, and a voice older than anything I had ever heard spoke my name. My name. Not my title. Not my species. My actual name, spoken correctly, in a language built for insect throats. I turned around and saw her for the first time. Queen Vesirath, ruler of the Jarnesi Hive Empire, a civilization that had existed longer than every human nation combined. She was massive, elegant, terrifying, and impossibly tired. Her eyes, 6 of them, all focused on me like I was the only thing left in the universe worth looking at. "You have been chosen," she said. I laughed. I actually laughed, right there in front of the entire Jarnesi court, because it had to be a mistake. Humans were not chosen for anything in this empire. We were tolerated. We were useful. We were never important. Nobody else laughed with me. That was the first sign that something was very wrong. The head of the council, a sharp-voiced official named Threxel, stepped forward and explained it to me the way you would explain something to a child who had wandered into a war zone by accident. The empire had a tradition, ancient and rarely used, called the right of outside blood. When the royal bloodline grew weak, the queen was required to take a consort from beyond Jarnesi society. Someone with no political power, someone disposable. It was supposed to be symbolic, a formality. A show of humility before the ancestors. For 1,000 years, no queen had needed it, because no queen had failed to produce an heir. Vesirath had failed for 3 generations. I did not know insect royalty could look heartbroken, but she did. The bioweapon war that ended 2 centuries ago had done something to the Jarnesi. Something in their genetic code had been damaged, quietly, slowly, and their scientists had spent decades trying to fix it in secret. Every clutch of eggs came back empty. The species was dying, not with an explosion, but with silence, one failed generation at a time. And somehow, through an error in translation, or an accident of fate, my name had ended up on a short list of acceptable candidates. Humans were considered safe, disposable, a joke consort that nobody expected to matter. I should have refused. I had every right to refuse. The treaty between Earth and the Empire allowed any human diplomat to decline ceremonial obligations without consequence. But I looked at Vesirath's face, and I saw something I recognized from human history books. I saw a leader watching her people die, and being told, over and over, that there was nothing she could do about it. I have never been good at walking away from that look. "I consent," I said. The chamber went completely silent. Even the guards stopped clicking. Threxel tried to stop it. He argued that the ritual was symbolic only, that actual bonding had never been intended, that no human physiology could survive the neural synchronization process. He was talking to me, but he was really talking to himself, trying to convince his own mind that this could not possibly go the way it was about to go. Vesirath silenced him with a single raised claw. "He said yes," she told the council. "That is the only requirement written in our law." They brought me to the bonding chamber that same night. I remember the walls were made of some kind of living crystal, pulsing faintly with a soft green light, like the whole room was breathing. Jarnesi technology did not look like human technology. It did not look built. It looked grown, the way a tree grows, the way a hive grows, patient and organic, and completely unbothered by the idea of time. They attached small nodes to my temples and to the base of my neck. A technician named Orven, one of the few Jarnesi who had ever bothered to learn basic human speech, tried to warn me one last time. "This has never worked on outsiders," she said quietly. "Every previous consort candidate rejected the connection within seconds. Their minds could not handle hive architecture. You should expect pain, and then nothing." I nodded. I was scared, but I did not let it show. "Do it," I said. The bonding began. At first it felt like static, like a radio tuning between stations. sharp and uncomfortable behind my eyes. I gritted my teeth and waited for the rejection Orvin had warned me about. I waited for the pain to stop, for the machines to power down, for someone to apologize and send me home with a strange story to tell. It did not stop. Instead, the static resolved into something else, something vast. I was not just connecting to Vesirath. I was connecting to everything behind her, the hive mind, a network of memory and instinct that stretched back 10,000 years, holding every Jarnesi thought, every Jarnesi fear, every Jarnesi secret that had ever been recorded into the collective archive. Human minds are not built like Jarnesi minds. We are not organized into neat, obedient patterns. We are chaotic, flexible, built by evolution to survive constant change, because our planet never gave us the luxury of staying the same for very long. Ice ages, plagues, famine, war. We adapted, or we died, generation after generation, until adaptability became the deepest part of who we are. That chaos did not get rejected by the hive network. It flooded it. I felt every technician in that chamber go rigid at the same moment. Orvin cried out something in her native tongue that I did not understand, but I understood the tone. Alarm, fear, awe. All three at once. I was inside the archive now, and the archive was inside me, and for the first time in the history of the Jarnesi Empire, a human mind was moving through their deepest memories, like water finding its way through cracked stone. I saw the bioweapon war. I saw it from the inside, through Jarnesi eyes, and it was worse than any history I had been taught. But that was not the thing that shocked me. The thing that shocked me was buried deeper, older, a memory the Empire had tried very hard to forget. 300 years before the war, long before any bioweapon had ever been designed, the Jarnesi Empire had made a choice. Their species existed in dozens of genetic branches back then, each one slightly different, shaped by different regions of their homeworld. Some branches had darker exoskeletons, some had different wing structures, some carried traits the ruling branch considered impure. The ruling branch decided that purity mattered more than diversity. They called it the Great Correction. In the archive, it was recorded in cold, clinical language, the way people describe things they are ashamed of. Entire branches of their own species were quietly bred out of existence. Not through violence, the records were careful to insist, but through denial. Denial of breeding rights, denial of resources, denial of a future, slow and bureaucratic and total. By the time the Great Correction finished, the entire empire descended from a single narrow genetic branch. A branch so narrow that when the bioweapon came 2 centuries later, it did not just weaken one part of the population, it weakened all of it, at the same time, in the same way, because there was no genetic variation left to resist it. The empire had spent 3 centuries hunting for a cure to a problem their own ancestors had built with their own hands. Nobody outside the highest levels of the council knew this. It had been buried, generation after generation, folded so deep into the archive that even the queen herself, I realized with a jolt, had never been told. I felt Vesirath's presence in the bond go completely still. She was seeing it too. For the first time, through me, she was seeing it too. "Is this true?" she said, and her voice inside the bond did not sound like a queen anymore. It sounded like someone who had just learned that her people's death sentence had been written by their own hands, centuries before she was born. I did not answer right away, because I was still trying to process what I was seeing myself. But somewhere in that flood of ancient memory, I found something else. A smaller record, tucked away, almost forgotten. A single scientist, from generations after the correction, who had written a warning nobody listened to. She said that narrowing their bloodline would leave them fragile. She said that strength was never found in sameness. She said that any species which refused new blood was choosing its own extinction slowly, quietly, one clutch at a time. Her name had been erased from every official record, but the archive remembered her anyway, because the hive mind forgets nothing, even the things the living choose to bury. The bonding chamber around me had gone completely silent. I realized later that every technician present had frozen in place, too stunned to move, because what was happening had never happened before in recorded Jarnesi history. A human, foreign, chaotic, supposedly disposable, had reached into the deepest archive of an ancient empire and pulled out a truth they had spent 300 years trying to forget. Threxil burst into the chamber, alerted by panicked messages from the technical staff. He took one look at the readings on the crystal walls and demanded the ritual be stopped immediately. "This was never meant to actually succeed," he shouted. "The bonding is corrupting the archive. It must be severed now, before permanent damage occurs." I felt Vesirath's presence shift beside mine. Something in her had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it now was something sharper, something that had not existed in her voice a few minutes earlier. "It is not corrupting the archive," she said, and her voice carried through the chamber, not just through the bond. "It is correcting it." Threxil froze. "For 300 years, Vesirath continued, our people have been dying slowly, and nobody could tell us why. I have just learned why. My own ancestors chose this fate for us, out of pride, out of fear of anything different from themselves. And they hid it so well that even I, sitting on this throne, never knew." The council members who had gathered behind Threxil began speaking over each other, their voices rising into a chittering, panicked noise that filled the chamber. Some demanded the bond be cut immediately. Others demanded to know if the memory was even real, or some kind of foreign corruption planted by an enemy species. A few, quieter than the rest, simply stared at the floor, saying nothing, because on some level, they had always suspected something like this was buried in their history. I understood then that I had a choice to make, and it would matter more than anything I had ever done in my life. I could let them sever the bond. I could go home a footnote in someone else's failed ceremony, a strange story to tell at dinner parties for the rest of my life. Nobody outside that room would ever know what I had seen. Or I could say what I actually believed, even though it was not my empire, not my history, and absolutely not my place. I said it anyway. "You have spent 3 centuries trying to cure a disease," I said, loud enough for the whole chamber to hear, when the real disease was the decision to stop being different from each other. You cannot fix a lack of diversity by looking harder within the same narrow bloodline. You have already tried that. It has not worked in 3 generations, and it will never work, because the problem was never a mutation. The problem was a choice your ancestors made to become smaller than they used to be. Threxil turned toward me, mandibles clicking with barely restrained anger. "You are a guest here, a symbolic gesture. You have no authority to speak on matters of Jarnesi genetics." "He has more authority than any of us realize," Vesirath said quietly. "He is bonded to the archive now. He carries our own history inside him, the parts we chose to forget. That gives him a right to speak that even I do not fully have, because I only just learned this history myself." The chamber went quiet again. I kept going, because I had come this far, and stopping now felt like a betrayal of everything I had just seen. "There is a whole galaxy of species out there," I said. "Some of them look nothing like you. Some of them think nothing like you. Humans are one of them, and clearly we are different enough that bonding with me broke every rule your ritual technicians expected to hold. But that difference is not what almost destroyed your empire. Sameness did that. Purity did that. If you want your bloodline to survive, you cannot search for the answer inside the same narrow branch that already failed you. You have to open the door, not just to humans. To every branch of your own species you erased, if any trace of them remains, and to every outside species willing to help, the same way I just did, whether the council likes it or not." Threxil opened his mouth to argue again, but Vesirath raised her claw a second time, and this time, there was no hesitation in the gesture at all. "Enough," she said. "I have ruled this empire for 140 years. I have watched clutch after clutch fail. I have watched my closest advisors tell me to wait, to trust the old methods, to trust the purity of our bloodline, because that is what we have always done. I trusted them, and in trusting them, I nearly let my people die out entirely, defending a tradition that was rotten at its foundation the entire time." She turned to face the full council, her voice carrying a weight I had not heard from her before, not exhaustion this time, but something closer to resolve. "We will open the royal genome," she announced, "not only to the human consort standing before you, but to every species willing to contribute, under careful and managed guidance from our own scientists. And we will search every archive, every forgotten record, for any surviving trace of the branches erased during the Great Correction. If even one descendant remains anywhere in this empire, they will be found, and they will be honored, not hidden. The reaction in the chamber was immediate and loud. Some council members shouted their agreement, others shouted their outrage. Threxil stood frozen between the two, unable to decide which side of history he wanted to be remembered on. It took nearly a full year before the results became undeniable. The first successful clutch in 3 generations was laid in the royal nesting chamber on a quiet morning, without any ceremony, without any fanfare, because nobody wanted to celebrate too early, in case it failed like every attempt before it. I stood beside Vesirath as the chamber technicians ran their scans, and I watched her expression change from guarded hope to something I had never seen on an insect face before, something unmistakably like joy. The eggs were viable, all of them. News spread through the empire faster than any official announcement could contain it. Some celebrated in the streets. Others, especially among the older nobility, treated it as a quiet scandal, a betrayal of everything the empire had once believed about its own purity. But nobody could argue with results. The bloodline had been dying for 3 generations under the old way. It thrived within a single year under the new one. Vesirath ordered a full public accounting of the Great Correction, the first time in 3 centuries that the truth had been spoken openly, instead of buried in a forgotten archive. It was not an easy announcement. Some citizens refused to believe it. Others were furious that it had been hidden for so long. But slowly, generation by generation, the empire began to change, not because it wanted to, but because it finally understood it had no other path left that did not end in extinction. I was given a title eventually, something long and formal in the Jarnesi language that translated roughly to Keeper of Forgotten Blood. I never quite got used to being called that. To me, I was still just the junior aide who had walked into the wrong chamber on the wrong day, standing in for an ambassador who never even noticed I was gone. Threxil never fully forgave me. I do not think he ever will. But even he could not deny the numbers, and in the strange, slow way that empires sometimes change their minds, he eventually stopped fighting the reforms and started quietly supporting them instead, perhaps because he understood which way history was already moving. Orven became one of the leading researchers studying the newly diversified bloodlines, and she still sends me updates sometimes, small notes about healthy clutches and growing numbers, written in careful, improving human speech that she has been practicing for years now, just because she wants me to be able to read them without a translator. I think about that first night often, the moment I said yes without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. I have wondered, more than once, what would have happened if I had simply laughed and walked out of that chamber, the way every instinct told me to. I do not think the Empire would have found the truth on its own, not because they were incapable of it, but because burying uncomfortable truths is something every civilization is capable of doing to itself, quietly, patiently, generation after generation, until the people doing the burying forget they ever buried anything at all. It took someone from outside, someone whose mind simply did not fit the old patterns, to break through walls that had stood untouched for 300 years. I did not save the Jarnesi Empire because I was special. I saved it because I was different, and for once, in a very long history of demanding sameness from itself, the Empire was finally desperate enough to let that difference in. I came into that chamber as nobody, a footnote, a symbolic gesture nobody expected to matter. I left as the answer to a question the entire empire had been too afraid to ask itself for 300 years. And somewhere, in a nesting chamber built from living crystal that pulses gently with green light, a new generation of Jarnesi is growing up, knowing a truth their ancestors tried to erase. That strength was never found in staying the same. It was always found in the courage to change.